This episode is a continuation of a conversation with my therapist, Lisa. We discuss such topics as trauma, shame, and most importantly, how do we return to ourselves? How do we return to the parts of ourselves that we've abandoned, that we've exiled? And in returning to the parts of ourselves, we discover we are returning to the source of our healing, which is our own love. If I don't figure this out, I'm going to die, I'm going to destroy my life, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose I already lost every relationship pretty much other than my daughter's, and even those were pretty rocky at that point. But yeah, I really felt like this is my last ditch effort. And so I came to you with some pretty overwhelming sense of desperation. Describe to me or maybe unpack a little bit about what you were experiencing, or how I showed up on that first phone call, and maybe what some of your thoughts were around that.
You were a bit stunned and disheveled, I will say. Yeah, I mean, you coming out of rehab is no joke. And I think there you were introduced to a lot of stuff that you had never even probably thought about, right? Yeah. And your body was without alcohol, so a lot of stuff was going on.
Yeah.
And getting a client like you is it's a joy, because you were so defenseless. And on your hand, it was desperate. For me, it's like, oh, good, I don't have to, bust this guy's walls down all over the place, because he's desperate. Yeah. So I could find you fairly easy. And that for a therapist is really a lovely thing. It's not the person who's in a lot of pain. It's the person who is still so defended that you can't find that. And you were not, because you were scared.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just the way human beings work, is that we have to get so scared before we will, surrender.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I was going to say it's unfortunate. I don't know if it is. I don't know what it is. It just is what it is, right?
It is what it is.
Yeah. And for me, it did require a stripping down. I think one of the things that I felt, and maybe even shared with you, was that I felt like every string in my life had been cut that was holding me up, right? All my little strings of an image, or of alcohol, or a relationship, or faith. I mean, all those things. All of that was getting cut and redefined and stripped back down to its core, and I couldn't figure out any handles to hold on to anymore. And even though that's frightening, and even though that can scare the crap out of you, it is one of the beautiful gifts that life gives us if we'll connect with it. And so if you're engaging with this episode and you're in that space where you're just like, I don't know what's happening with me, everything seems to have been stripped away, there is a gift in that. And if you can look for the gift and try to find that gift, and the gift is you. You are telling yourself that you're tired of trying to live all of that life, and that you can come back to yourself. You can return to who you are. There is a returning process that life gives us as a gift by stripping away everything that we've bolted onto us. And I bolted so much onto me, it was exhausting to carry it. I bolted on the work, the perfect this or that or whatever, and couldn't sustain it anymore. And so, so many people do that. Yeah. So,
it gets too heavy.
It does get too heavy. So.
And it's no fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No.
I mean, it's just a lot of work, and it's just no fun. I mean, being on the other side of it, it's like, oh my gosh, without all that stuff, life can actually be fun and easy.
It can. It's a whole new world.
It's a whole new world. Yeah. So that's the way I found you.
Yeah. And thank God that you were recommended to me by a fantastic therapist there at Peaks. And so, one thing that I think happens, and I want to take a little bit of a progression through the ideas of, shame, awareness of shame, and then discovery of the sources of those messages, right? I had no idea I was dealing with shame. I just knew that I hated myself. And I wouldn't even have articulated it that way, that I hated myself. I just didn't ever feel comfortable in my own presence. And I drank a part of my drinking was in order to tolerate being in my own presence. It provided me escape from everything and an escape from me. And, as I used that as a survival tool, you took me on a journey to really help me understand what I was trying to manage with the drinking. And instead of managing the drinking, right, I self-detoxed a number of times, dangerously self-detoxed, and then detoxed twice in rehab. And I just kept thinking that someday I'll be able to figure out how to manage my drinking, or whatever the addiction is for the person. We just try to figure out, how do I manage that? How do I keep that in my life so that it gives me
Right.
some relief, but it doesn't get me out of control to where it's destroying my life? And that beautiful journey you took me on is, let's not try to manage that, but let's figure out what that is helping you manage. And is it managing the pain, managing the voice, the stories that you have. And so in that journey, what would you say is some of the key things that helps a person get past that layer of unawareness, right? Like, I wasn't aware that I had the shame. I minimized the heck out of my trauma, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But what do you think is kind of like the key thing that helps a person begin to awaken to the fact there's something that lies beneath? It's not all of this that you're dealing with. The symptoms are not the issue. Because I think there's a lot of people who are walking around going, I don't know, there's just something wrong with me, and I don't like my life, and things are bad, and this or that, and I can't seem to manage relationships, and I can't X, Y, or Z. Because for me, it was very liberating to understand that there was a source of unhealed trauma that was being dealt with and managed in those ways. How do you move a person from what's wrong with me, that I keep all this behavior, to what happened to me, and that realization that there's something that's going on below the surface?
I think it's that simple.
Yeah.
I think it's about helping somebody recognize, like starting to get curious about what happened to them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's that simple that's what I was interested in, because I knew, right,
Yeah.
that really was a symptom.
Yeah.
And that you had a whole history of somehow being separate from yourself, and it had manifested in drinking and all these other ways that you creatively
Yeah.
manage that. And so it was just about being curious as to what happened to you.
Yeah.
I think it's just that simple.
Beautiful.
But nobody ever stops and asks that.
Right. No,
You
'cause
know?
we're so busy trying to manage all the plates that we're spinning in order to, manage the life that we're trying to create to separate us from ourselves. And once again, as those of you who are engaging in this podcast, I want you to continue to hear that message of that self-separation, is that self-separation is painful, but it's also, when that realization comes, it points you back to this beautiful source. And so I want to keep reiterating that, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't work with people to help them understand, that once again, pointing you back to you. But as you said, being curious in that space, and what we're trying to do is, we just don't ever take the pause, right? Life then somehow forces us to take the pause.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I have a question for you, because you have told me before that I was not what you expected and I was so different. And I want to know, well, what did you expect? And what was so different?
yeah.
What did you think was going to happen?
Yeah, well, interesting. Maybe there's two things here, right? There could be the Jerry Henderson who went to therapy before, who was looking for problems or looking for reasons why something wasn't going to work, etc. And so it allowed me to see things that, or didn't allow me to see certain things that maybe could have been a gift, that were hiding behind my projections of why this wasn't going to work as a therapist or whatever. But the other side of that is that I had usually two experiences with therapists. One is, I got the textbook. I'm going to define you. I'm going to put you in this label. I'm going to then prescribe you these 4 things. And then you're kind of like, well, I don't think that's really what's going on with me. Yeah, I can go to an AA group, or yeah, I can do this thing that you're talking about, or read this book. But I don't know. It just doesn't really feel like that's what's happening. Now, It could be that I didn't know what was happening, which is probably the case, but there was just this prescriptive approach that didn't allow for curiosity and didn't allow for customization, which just felt like I'm just getting a textbook label. The other thing that was interesting that would happen at times is somehow I would be winding up in the counselor's seat. And because of my former history as a pastor, and if I was seeing Christian counselors, all of a sudden they would begin to ask me about, well, what do you think about this? And I've got, my husband does X, or, my person that my son is, and I'm like, I'm trying to pay you to help me. I'm not here to, understand your issues. That's fine. But, and so I had that happen on 2 occasions, actually, where I had to terminate the, relationship because of that. And then the other thing that had happened a couple times is they would forget that, what you were really trying to work through at times, and it would just become repetitive counseling sessions, repetitive therapy sessions. And it was almost like they had their script that they needed to execute in a therapy session, and you were going to become just the kind of the bystander in the therapy session. And so, and I want to encourage people who are watching or listening to this podcast that if you've had experiences with therapy, and I'll get messages from people that like, I've tried therapy and it just hasn't worked for me, and it just gives this approach that just doesn't see me as a person. I want to encourage you, there are therapists like Lisa who can really help in that space. That it's not prescriptive. It takes a mindfulness approach, and that was one of the other things, that you combine this beautiful work of mindfulness and clinical psychology together. Talk to us a little bit about your approach, and I'm sure you've experienced other clinicians or folks in the mental health profession who do take that very scripted textbook approach. But what drew you to that? And talk to us about how you do that and why you do that.
Well, I think it's ridiculous to think that every person would, I don't see therapy as a recipe that you apply to somebody. I see it as a relationship, right? That you are just getting really curious about that person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think of therapy, for me, it feels like an art form. It doesn't feel like a science. It feels like, which is why it's difficult for me to answer specific questions, because it doesn't work like that in my head. Like it's not something that's like a script.
Yeah.
It's super intuitive, and it's based on the relationship, because I'm a firm believer that if you don't have a strong relationship with the person, forget it. It just won't work, because your psyche won't trust me. And if your psyche doesn't trust me, then we can't go where we need to go. So that's my main goal is, in the first session, is for us to figure out if we have a connection.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. If you felt like I got it, like I understood what was going on, and I could somehow relate to you. I mean, that's always my number one goal. Because I love to have new clients, but if it's not a fit, it just doesn't work. And I have to say, I think that's happened maybe 3 times in my whole career, because I'm pretty good because I like people and I like to be curious. Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, would think the way I do therapy is unusual or whatever, but it seems to work, and it's just really based in the relationship, and it's about being super curious together. I mean, I'm not doing the work. I'm just walking the journey with you.
Right.
And I'm just noticing things that might be in the path that are in the way, that maybe we could pick up the rock and look under this, or we could look around this corner, or maybe I can anticipate something that's coming up.
Yeah.
And I'm really trying to get in you. I'm really trying to think, what is it like to be Jerry, you know? What is it like to move through the world as Jerry? Because if I'm in you, I can start to understand how you see things.
Yeah.
And therefore, I can see maybe where there's some troubling spots.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I could get in you, and I could see, oh, this guy, this guy has been pretending for a long time, and this guy has used a lot of things to try and make himself and his life okay.
Yeah. Wow.
And he's somebody who really wants to be who he is.
Wow. Yeah, just as you were even articulating that, made me just even a little emotional in that moment where you were talking about this guy's been pretending, for so long, and it's still definitely something I continue to struggle with. And yet there's more of my authentic self than ever before, but yet still some of that separation. I could even feel it as you were talking, just a separation from me, who I should project, versus the authentic me. And I think a lot of that work is closing that gap. What do you think? Like closing the gap between who I think I have to be or how I feel about myself versus who I am. And when you said that, I felt that I became aware of that distance, that gap became alive again in me just a little bit. No shame or judgment about it. It's just awareness, which your curiosity approach, what it did for me is it provided a safe place, it felt safe. And then it allowed me to be curious about myself and investigating myself, which I hadn't done. I was more about bolting on who I should be than understanding who I am.
And I think it's just such an amazing experience the first time somebody suggests that maybe you could just get out of judgment and you could just get curious. Like, what a novel concept. Like, you mean I don't have to have all this stuff around, who I am or what I think? I could just start to explore? That's a really, really, really freeing place to be.
It is. Yeah, it's one of the most freeing, I think, things that I learned from you in therapy. I mean, I learned a lot, but one of the things that felt liberating, right? There's these moments where you feel liberated, you feel like you have permission to do something. And thus the title of the podcast, right? Permission to love. How do I find the permission to love myself and come back to myself? And so that permission to be curious was very freeing for me, very liberating.
It's a huge word. Offering somebody curiosity instead of fear is just it. I mean, I know because I play with that in my own life about like, what if you just got curious about it instead of all, wound up in a knot? And instantly it's just like, oh my God, I could breathe, Yeah. My son and I have been talking a lot about the word allow.
Okay, tell me about that.
And how generous that word is. So he reminded me recently that, he said, Mom, who are the happy people that you know? Are they the ones that are allowing or are they the ones that are resisting? And I just thought that was so powerful. So we talk about the word allowing a lot, which I think is a distant relative of curiosity. It just provides some space.
Yeah, I love that. So would that, there's so much that we don't allow for ourselves, right? Even in our healing process. I don't allow myself to have a bad day. I don't allow myself to, feel that anxiety. Instead, I try to resist it and push it down. And so I meet anxiety with more anxiety, become anxious about the anxiety, and I feel shame for the shame or judgment because of the judgment. And so instead, what would you encourage in that concept of allowing, when people find themselves in that loop?
I just encourage them to get out of the commentary about it and just sit with it, which is another thing that's really, really difficult because, sitting in discomfort is not something that people are generally know how to do or want to do. And honestly, it's not fun, but it does, if we can do that and we can just allow ourselves to be curious, then we can provide ourselves an opportunity to experience something in a different way.
Yeah, to just be able to sit with yourself, to be curious, because we hear a lot from, therapy and, mental health industry, you need to sit with your feelings, right? And so that almost has been said enough to where maybe it gets dismissed, right? Like, I don't want to sit with my feelings. I want to distract myself. What's the value in that, in sitting with it and getting over the barrier of not wanting to do that?
Well, I'll back up a little bit from that question and actually say there is some definite benefit in understanding the resistance. Like why is that so terrifying, right? Why is that so scary? Right? And a lot of people that haven't sat in their feelings are like, well, if I sit in my feelings, I'm never going to get my ass off this couch. I'm just going to sit in depression, anxiety forever.
Wow.
Right? Because I've got a whole lifetime of avoiding, and if I allow myself to open that door, I'm just going to be flooded. But the benefit of it is because emotions are supposed to be experienced. I mean, that is the way we are designed. They are supposed to be felt. Right? They are supposed to go full circle. They're supposed to complete a circle. If somebody, your hamster dies, you're sad, you cry, you grieve, you mourn, you move through the whole thing, but we stunt ourselves. We start to feel it and we cut it off, and so therefore then we just have all this stuff all these emotions that have never been completed and cycled through. I probably said it to you before, but it's like being emotionally constipated. I mean, if you ate and you never pooped, you'd be a wreck.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And the wreck that I was, right? And the wreck that I'm
Yeah.
trying to not continue to be.
And then people think anxiety is, this horrible thing, or depression. And in fact, anxiety is just a way of letting you know that you're not paying attention to yourself, just the way a stomach ache would let you know you're not paying attention to yourself. There's something that you need, right? And so I think curiosity allows us to just examine that. Like, what is this trying to tell me, as opposed to, no, I don't want to have that. I can't have that. It's just a way that your psyche is signaling that you need something.
And so then when we resist that, so we got a signal that's coming, and when we resist it, we try to stop that. Fundamentally, are we resisting ourselves at that point?
Totally resisting yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely resisting yourself. And the beauty of the way that we're wired is that you won't get away from that very long, because you'll resist, and then you'll wind up either with panic attacks or depression so intense, right, that it'll, paralyze you. Paralyze you, not literally, but you know what I mean. It'll keep you so stuck.
Yeah.
And so the psyche keeps giving us reminders of wanting us to move back towards ourselves to complete emotional cycles that in trauma can't get completed.
Wow.
So it's all so intertwined.
Wow, I am so thankful once again for Lisa taking her time to be a part of these episodes. We'll continue this conversation again next week. Now, if you are interested in working with Lisa, she does one-on-one therapy as well as one-on-one private coaching. You can find out more information about how to work with her by seeing the show notes in this episode. And speaking of coaching, I am so excited to be launching a group coaching program in the month of February. Traditionally, I only do one-on-one private coaching with individuals, but due to the increasing demand of people wanting to learn how to love themselves, I decided to launch a group program. You can find out more information and get on the wait list by going to jerryhenderson.org/coaching. And for the listeners of this podcast and for those who follow me on Instagram, if you sign up for the wait list this month and make your first payment, you get 50% off of your first month. So don't wait, get signed up because the spots are going to be limited. And finally, I'm super excited to be releasing a book in the month of March. The book is a collection of thoughts and poetry on self-love and healing. So if you haven't done so yet, sign up for my newsletter because that'll notify you the day that the book gets released. Well, I am so grateful that you took your time to be a part of this episode today. And remember, as always, that you are worthy of your own love.